Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Reclamation Project, where we believe in no soul left behind. Hey, tell me, who can resist the lure of a scary movie during the spine-tingling time of the year? Huh? Whether or not we should. The adrenaline rush, the heart-pounding suspense, it's all a part of the fun, right? But what if we told you that indulging in fear might be more trick than treat? Join Professor Michael Buffington, who is up today, who he is going to unravel the sinister connection between your favorite frights and your well-being. It turns out the thrill of fear releases an addictive cocktail of dopamine and endorphins that can be silently wreaking havoc on your health. Are you brave enough to face a bone-chilling truth? This Halloween, instead of trick-or-treating, prepare to unearth the dark secrets behind your love for fear. It's a revelation that just might leave you trembling, and not just from the scares on the screen. So, Professor Michael Buffington, he is up today.
How you doing, brother?
Yes, doing great, man. Looking forward to this connection. This revelation.
Right, always good to be here on the Reclamation Project. All right, so I am coming to you all from LA, so I do not have my regular setup, so please forgive me if there are any technical difficulties, but I pray that everything goes through smoothly and clearly. So what we're going to talk about today is something very, very important and often overlooked by the vast majority of people, and that is the effect of fear on the human mind, soul, and body. Now, one of the things that you will find over and over if you ever study the scriptures is God constantly encouraging, reminding, and telling humanity to fear not. Don't be afraid. Fear not. Trust in me. In fact, in one of the most famous verses in the Bible, in the book of 1 John chapter 4, it says, "There is no fear in love, for perfect love casteth out fear." So why is there this emphasis in the Bible about casting out fear and about not being afraid? And that is because fear is actually very, very dangerous. In fact, the first sin that occurred in the Bible, according to the scriptures, was the result of somebody being afraid of missing out. And then the first fear ever mentioned, the first emotion ever mentioned in the Bible in Genesis chapter 3 was fear. So fear is very powerful, and that is why there's so many admonitions in the Bible about fearing not. Don't fear. Don't be afraid. Don't worry. I got you. That's what God is saying. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was one of our former presidents, the president during the time of World War II, he said something very powerful. He said about fear, he said, the only thing to fear is fear itself. Okay? So he said, there's really nothing to be afraid of in this world. There's nothing that we can't overcome. The only thing that you need to be afraid of is fear, because fear is actually very, very dangerous, and it's very destructive. Did you hear that? Fear is dangerous and it's destructive. So fear is a very powerful thing, and it's something that we have to be afraid. We have to be afraid of, right? The writer Ralph Waldo Emerson, he actually said this. He said, "Fear defeats more people than any other one thing in the world." Fear defeats more people than any other one thing in the world. And C.S. Lewis, He said, when the whole world is running toward a cliff and they're full of fear and panicking, he who is running the opposite direction appears to have lost his mind. People don't understand. That's why Paul, when he refers to people who have peace in times when most people should be afraid, he calls it the peace that passes understanding, because normal people just won't understand it. Fear is a very powerful thing. And yet, here we are in this time of year, it's the fall, and guess what's coming up? In a few days, there is a quote unquote holiday coming up called Halloween. And what is Halloween about? It's about making fear a game, making fear a joke, making it something fun, right? It's a celebration of gore, of death. I mean, I'm not really big on Christmas, but at least the decorations are pretty, right? You got the pretty lights and, whatever, snowmen and things like that. That's what people put up, and it's pretty. I may not necessarily be a huge fan of Christmas, but it's at least it looks nice. But in Halloween, when you walk around the neighborhood, what do you see? Caskets and graveyards and spider webs and skeletons and witches and zombies and death and blood and gore and murder and ghouls. It's absolutely sickening. It's a celebration of death and gore. And what's one of the favorite things that people do during Halloween? They go to haunted houses. Why? Because it's fun to be scared, right? So something, despite the fact that we're admonished not to fear, not to be afraid, something's turning fear into a game. Something's turning fear into a game, to a fun thing, right? In fact, one of the favorite things that people like to do around this time is they like to watch scary movies. They like to watch horror films. Um, Now, why is it, despite us being admonished over and over not to be afraid, despite us being admonished to fear not, to trust God, to control fear, to have peace when most people would have none? Why is fear being perpetuated and even turned into something fun and cool and a game and things like that? It's because there is somebody who understands the power of fear. Fear is dangerous and it's destructive. Somebody understands this and is using fear as a weapon against you, against your mind, against your heart, against your spirit. Um, Now, why is fear such a good tool for somebody who, I don't know, would want to destroy humanity or destroy you individually? Because fear is dangerous. Fear brings out the worst in people. When people become afraid, we turn into animals, right? Normally what separates us from animals is that we operate on, we can use something called morals. We operate on right and wrong. Animals operate on instinct, right? When they become afraid, they operate on instinct. When a cat becomes afraid, it's backed into a corner. His back arches and the hair stands up and his tail stands up and the claws come out, right? This is an instinctive reaction to fear. But as human beings, we have a mind, right, where we can make logical, rational decisions and have rational thoughts, and we can choose not to be controlled by that fear. But what fear does is fear makes rational people irrational, and it makes rational people do irrational things. It essentially takes away those morals that separate us from the animal kingdom and make us different and turns us into high functioning animals. In fact, there's a book called The Great Controversy, and it talks about this event, the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And what's crazy is as Jerusalem was being destroyed by the Roman army, there were people inside that were full of fear, and these normally rational, good, moral people turned into absolute animals. It says natural affection seemed to have been destroyed. Husbands robbed their wives. Did you hear that? Husbands robbed their wives, and the wives their husbands. Children would be seen snatching food from the mouths of their aged parents. This is what happened in a place where they were all surrounded by fear. In other words, fear made people lose their minds and behave like selfish animals. And what's interesting about this is that fear is not good for the immune system. We'll get into that more in a bit. But I have an article here. It's about the media and fear. Okay, and some of you may not know this, but I at one point was slated to be in an on-camera role at a very prominent news organization. So I've had conversations with high-level producers about why the media promotes fear. And in this article in Psychology Today, it says, if it bleeds, it leads, understanding the fear-based media. Listen to what it says. It says, fear-based news stories prey on the anxieties we all have and then hold us hostage. Being glued to the television, reading the paper, or surfing the internet increases ratings and market shares, but it also raises the probability of a depression relapse. In previous decades, the journalistic mission was to report the news as it actually happened with fairness, balance, and integrity. However, capitalistic motives associated with journalism has forced much of today's television news to look to the spectacular, the stirring, the controversial as news stories. It's no longer a race to break the story first or get the facts right. Instead, it's to acquire good ratings in order to get advertisers so that profits soar. So in other words, journalism has turned from reporting facts accurately to getting the highest ratings so that profits come in. So it's profits over people, right? And you'll see this pattern throughout, many different industries like the medical industry, et cetera, et cetera. It says news programming uses a hierarchy. If it bleeds, it leads. Fear-based news programming has two aims. First, to grab the viewer's attention. Why? Ratings equal money. And it says in the news media, it's called a teaser. The second aim is to persuade the viewer that the solution for reducing the identified fear will be in the news story. If a teaser asks, what's in your tap water that you need to know about? A viewer will likely tune in to get the updated information to ensure safety. What do they use? They use fear to keep you hooked, right? Says the success of fear-based news relies on presenting dramatic anecdotes in place of scientific evidence, promoting isolated events as trends. You notice that? So, for example, regardless of how you feel about the issue of the Second Amendment or guns, what they'll do is they'll take a school shooting, and instead of saying, here's this isolated incident with this crazed individual who did something horrible, they'll say, this is a trend. This is happening all over the place. Why? Because that ratchets up fear and it supports people who want to get rid of the Second Amendment. So that's just an example. For lack of a better example, that's an example. It says depicting categories of people as dangerous. So, for example, they're creating folk devils using fear. So you take somebody like, I don't know, Trump supporters, for example, and people think that Trump supporters are, well, as Hillary Clinton put it, she said that Trump supporters were a basket of deplorables, right? They're deplorable people. They're horrible. They're white supremacists. They're Nazis. They're this, they're that. That's what the media is doing. They're ratcheting up fear because when people hate these people and see them as dangerous, when they do things like replace optimism with fatalistic thinking and things like that, it creates more ratings. Fear sells. So, you have to understand, how these people are using fear and why. It's a tool. It's a tool to control. It's a tool to take away rational thinking, and it's a tool to essentially drive profits. Now, so you have the news media who is using fear as a tool. And everywhere we turn in politics, with politicians, they're using fear. Um, in business, they're using fear. Everywhere they're using fear because fear is a method and a tool of control. Not only that, but going back to the issue of Halloween, right? It starts there. People think fear is a joke. They go to these haunted houses, they watch these horror movies and things like that, and then they become addicted to fear. And that's why the news media and these places are able to use fear as a weapon against them, because we're in this society, especially in American society, we are so addicted to fear. I have an article here by Joe Emerson called Addicted to Fear. And it says, do we believe as a society that we're addicted to fear? Just switch on the news, which we just talked about, or go into your social media channels and you'll find people telling you this is a scary world, or how to be thinner, younger, leaner, richer, or that we are all victims, and on and on. Fear mongering is everywhere and we are hooked on it. So what did I just mention? Okay, the news and politics, business, in many different spheres of life, they're using fear because we're hooked on fear. Why? Because we trifled with it. We started going to the haunted houses and watching the horror movies and things like that, thinking fear was a joke and a game, not realizing that fear was the exact thing that led to the fall of our earthly parents, Adam and Eve. Not realizing that God admonished us not to give in to fear, to not be afraid, to not be controlled by fear, because he knew how deadly and how dangerous and destructive fear was. But we didn't listen, as usual, and here we are as a society being led by the nose into all sorts of things because we're afraid to go against the grain. Says here in the article, the nature of addiction is obsessive thinking, seeking more of the same substance, and avoidance of current feelings. She says, if we're caught up in the fear habit, we will even spend time looking for something to worry about in order to feel normal. You ever met people like that? Everything's good, bills are paid, house note is paid, car note is paid, you're healthy, and yet they seem to find something to worry about. Okay, it comes from this addiction to fear. She says, I know people who don't feel right if they're not worrying about something. They truly believe that their act of worrying is preventing the imagined bad thing from happening. They become obsessed with the worry du jour, or the worry of the day. Fear is addictive because it causes us to live in a constant state, in a state of constant overproduction of adrenaline, okay, which, like any chemical, can be habit forming. So what happens when we become afraid? The body produces adrenaline. Okay, and have you ever heard the term adrenaline junkie? That's an actual term. These are the people that love, jumping out of planes, that love, um, you know, doing death-defying stunts, climbing Mount Himalaya. I mean, going bungee jumping. I don't know, crazy stuff like that. Me personally, my feet are on the ground. I have no desire to be in an ocean. If it's not a pool where I can swim to the edge, if I get thrown in, I'm good, right? I have no desire, no thank you. But there are a lot of people who are addicted to this kind of stuff. They're called adrenaline junkies. Why? Because people literally become addicted to that rush of adrenaline. Okay, this is what fear does. It releases adrenaline, which, like any chemical, whether it's cocaine, heroin, marijuana, whatever, it can become habit forming. Okay. So what happens when we're afraid, we're usually, you know, in our heads, at least in the future and not necessarily in the present. Um, she says fear is addictive in that it stops us being in the moment and experiencing life as it currently is. We use fear as a distraction from the truth, which is that now, or which is all that we have, um, and uh, and guess what? In the moment, fear can exist because it's not real, or fear cannot exist because it's not real. It's not happening now. It's an imagined scenario in our adult heads. This is a big concept to get your head around. And she says, when you stop and breathe deeply and simply live in the now, you'll find that you're not afraid, right? Because most of the stuff that we're afraid of is hypothetical. It's hyperbolic. Oh, what if I end up homeless? What if I lose my job and I lose my car and my wife flees me? And like, this is stuff that hasn't happened, and there may be not even be any evidence that this is going to happen, and yet we will be afraid like it's happening right now in the moment, and we'll be experiencing the same sort of adrenaline rushes, the chemical releases. So this is why people love horror movies and things like that, because it has this effect on the body. It has this adrenaline dump, which makes us feel good, like when we do drugs like cocaine and things like that. But even when we're not watching horror movies, we'll find things to worry about because it makes us feel good, oddly, right? Um, she goes on and says, even if you are in pain or heartbroken or facing financial ruin, right now in this moment, you're okay. You might not like what's happening, but you're okay. Your fear is all about what might happen in the future. And what I mean about it not, and that's what I mean about it not being real. It isn't happening now. Right now, you're so okay. Right now, you are so okay. You have time and energy to waste worrying. So here's the point. If you're really going through some bad stuff, um, we're wasting time and energy worrying instead of finding a solution, instead of going to God and asking for the answers to help get yourself out of the situation, to rectify and remedy the problem. You're worrying. That's silly, right? The only time that we actually have time to sit down and worry is when nothing's really wrong, because otherwise you got to go into action, right? um, Breaking the addictive fear habit is a lifelong piece of work. But noticing the fear voice and how you're hooked on it is the first step. Fear tells lies about an imagined future. Love tells the truth about the moment that you are in. You choose moment by moment which one to listen to. So there's two choices. Either you're going to listen to fear or you're going to listen to love. Now, here's a secular article essentially quoting what the Bible said in 1 John 4:18. For there is no fear in love, for perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. Secular article. We don't talk about this enough amongst believers. And what happens is the rocks are crying out. This secular article is telling us fear tells lies about an imagined future. Love tells the truth about the moment that you are in. They are mutually exclusive. You cannot have them together. You can have fear or you can have love. You can have fear or you can have faith. You can have worry or you can have trust in God, but you can't have both. They're like oil and water. They don't mix, you know? Um, and this is why trifling with anything that would cause us to be more addicted to fear is dangerous, like horror movies. H.P. Lovecraft said, the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. The oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown, right? So what's a perfect remedy for fear of the unknown? Faith. Right? Faith means, hey, even if I don't know, even if I don't understand, I can trust you. Um, now, going back to the issue of addiction to fear, I have another article. This is actually from the Huffington Post, and it talks specifically about fear. There's a quote that says, "Fear is is an addictive drug. Once you fear, you fall into the trap, and if you give it a place to make a home in your heart, you'll forever be changed. Courage is the sword to break this house of fear. So work out on it with patience, right? So you could have fear or courage. I personally choose courage. Let's go back to horror movies. Actually, this is not in Huffington Post. This is in inverse.com, and it's called "What Horror Movies Do to Your Brain According to Science." This is not hyperbole. This is not my opinion, my thought, my feelings. This is according to science what horror movies do to the brain. It says horror movies are so terrifyingly effective because, listen to this, because on a subconscious level, your brain thinks that you're actually about to be murdered. This is what's happening, not on a conscious level, but on a subconscious level. When you're sitting around watching a screen, the motor regions of your brain turn off as your body relaxes. But on a conscious level, your brain is aware that the movie isn't real. Scary movies bypass the conscious parts of the brain to tap directly into the fight or flight response. It begins in the amygdala, which evolved to respond immediately to anything that looks like a threat, regardless of how real it actually is. The amygdala sounds the alarm to your body, first activating the hypothalamus, which tells your adrenal glands to inject you with a boost of adrenaline. So what did I say again? Fear produces those adrenaline dumps. And like there are adrenaline junkies, there are people that become addicted to that adrenaline dump that happens when they become afraid. This causes the heart to pump faster and faster, delivering more oxygen to the muscles in case you need to fight something or run away. Now, it brings up this movie called The Exorcist, and it says, The Exorcist may not be real, but your brain isn't going to take any chances. The most effective parts of the horror movie, though, isn't the on-screen monsters, but rather the background music. Did you hear that? So there's even such a thing as scary music. It says the screechy, discordant, non-linear noises that build and crescendo sound enough like a baby scream that they activate the same genetically hardwired response pathways that a wailing child does. So all that, and all that scary, creepy music that they play, it says it actually sounds enough to our subconscious mind like a baby scream that it activates the same genetically hardwired response pathways that would be triggered when we heard an actual wailing child. That's how dangerous this is. And people don't understand this. Like if you watched a scary movie without the scary music, it wouldn't have the same effect, right? So that's why the two work together. And for example, if you look at, let's take hip hop music, right? Back in the 80s, when I was growing up, I wasn't always a Christian, so I'm very familiar with all this stuff. And when I was growing up, it was all like fun and have a good time and party and this and that. The music was fun. Same thing in the 90s, But coming into the 2000s, especially now the 2010s, they have this music, they call it trap music. And, I as a professor, I'm around a lot of young people. So, I hear this stuff that they're listening to. And what I noticed about it was it all sounds like scary movie music. It sounds like uncomfortable and creepy. And these people are listening to this stuff on repeat. It's dark. It's talking about doing drugs. Like when we were growing up, you didn't talk about they might have talked about selling drugs, but nobody talked about doing drugs. They're talking about killing themselves. And, that was just one song. I don't know who was listening to it, but the dude was talking about all my friends are dead. And I'm like, that's an odd thing to say in a song, right? But this is what's happening, right? So even in the music, in popular music today, you have this discordant, dark sort of melodies because it's a part of this whole thing trying to create this addiction to fear amongst every aspect of society for a reason, because the ultimate goal is to destroy you and I. Says, however, despite the cold sweats and lingering nightmares, since there's still a high demand for horror, scary movies alone have made $1 billion in ticket sales since Frankenstein 1931. One very possible reason, that's over, or made not over $1 billion, it's made billions of dollars in ticket sales. One very possible reason for this is linked to the addiction pathways. Okay, so here we are back again to fear and addiction. The adrenaline released from a fear response can cause a viewer to seek out that sensation again and again. Why? Because you become addicted to it. Feels good. What our love of all things horror may also stem from the arousal transfer theory, suggesting that negative emotions created by scaring situations can intensify the positive feelings that we experience when the characters make it out alive. Either way, the pure rush of adrenaline that horror movies evoke hasn't stopped people from coming back for more. So again and again, we see that in the very beginning, according to the Bible, our first parents sinned because of fear of missing out. According to the Bible, Eve sinned because she feared missing out on this opportunity to be as a God, knowing both good and evil. And then Adam sinned because he was afraid of living without his wife. And the very first emotion was mentioned, I believe, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 9, where the Lord said, Adam, where art thou? And he said, I hid myself because I was naked and afraid, right? So the very first emotion ever mentioned in the Bible is fear. It was used against us then, and it's being used against us now. The news media knows that in order to drive ratings, because our society is so addicted to fear, that they have to push fear. And I've talked to producers and I said, why is everything so negative? And they said, I quote, we tried that positive stuff and it doesn't work. It's all about money. It's all about ratings. So what brings in the ratings? You scare the daylights out of people and they'll stay glued to the TV. I'll never forget as a young man when 9/11 happened. September 11, 2001. I didn't understand what I do now. And I couldn't understand what had just happened. And I remember sitting glued to my TV all day. I couldn't turn it off because I was trying to understand and I was afraid. Well, I understand the world a little bit differently now. We won't get into that just yet. But I will say this, that I understand the power of fear like I didn't as a young man. And one of the things that I understand is that fear has been used against us as a society. We have been programmed to become addicted to fear. And now that knowledge of how addicted we are is being used by media companies to keep us hooked to their news programs so that they can get advertising dollars and drive ratings and make money ultimately. And, because we're addicted to fear and we need that hit of dopamine, that hit of adrenaline that we get from watching scary movies, we keep going back more and more. But just like the drug addict who cannot be satisfied with the same amount that they had in the beginning, they have to get more and they have to get more. And then they get into harder drugs and crazier things. They used to call marijuana a gateway drug because they used to say that marijuana led to other harder things like cocaine and heroin. And the reason why people do that when they ratchet up to, let's say they're watching something explicit, some sort of pornography or something like that, maybe in the beginning it's one thing, but if they consume this stuff consistently, they become depraved and they start needing more and more depraved material to help produce the same high. They call it chasing the high. So, if you watch Frankenstein, the 1931 Frankenstein now, you'd probably laugh. It probably is almost like a comedy. To those people, that was scary. But nowadays, a horror film has to have gore. It has to have blood. It has to have all kinds of horrible things to maintain the hold on people. Why? Because we have become so acclimated to things like scary movies and fearful images that we need a bigger hit and a greater dopamine release by looking at these types of things. you know, in psychcentral.com says why some people love horror movies and while others hate them. It says some people may like scary movies because they enjoy the adrenaline rush of being scared while safe. Um, some people like anything that gets their mind off their own problems. Individuals who are highly empathetic may not like scary movies. So I'm kind of a more empathetic person by nature, and I have no desire to watch a scary movie at all. For many reasons, but that's one of them. Like, I don't want to see people getting murdered. Like, that's awful. Um, and it says, you know what else people do to get off their minds, or to get their minds off their problems? Drugs. So fear is just like a drug. Why do people like Halloween so much? Why do people enjoy putting up the caskets? And I mean, if a family member dies, you're not going to the funeral saying, boy, this is fun. But for some reason on Halloween, we love putting up the caskets and the tombstones and the skeletons and the spider webs and all these things that represent death, right? We love watching the horror movies. Why? Because it gives us that adrenaline rush. So there's this fear that's being put on us, and we're being conditioned because fear can be used to control us, and it will be used to destroy us if we have not overcome it by faith and by understanding the love of God. And so, beyond that, not only does fear affect us on an emotional level, but I mentioned this earlier, fear actually affects our immune response. Okay. It says, I have an article here from Medical News Today, and it says, new research uncovers fresh evidence to suggest that frequent exposure to negative emotions may have an important impact on the functioning of the immune system. So fear is not just a negative emotion, it's the root of all negative emotions. And it's saying here that frequent exposure to negative emotions may have an important impact on the functioning of the immune system. Well, what happened recently when we had the whole pandemic, or AKA COVID, it was constant fear, 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 fear. As a matter of fact, CNN was the worst offender, and they used to keep that counter on the screen 24 hours a day showing how many people were dying from COVID. Look at how many people are dying now. Look at how many people are dying. As a matter of fact, they did this one interview. It was a journalist for Project Veritas. He recorded unknowingly a producer from CNN, and he was like, yeah, we love the fear counter. It's really great for ratings. And, sometimes I see that fear counter and I just wish it would go up higher and higher and higher. And it's like, you sick human being. Like, why would you want more people to die? But that's where it's at, right? And so during this time when we need our immune system to be strong and intact, they're bombarding us with fear. But so what is the key to overcoming fear? In the book Emotions, on page 50, it says, understanding his mighty presence with us is the key to overcoming whatever scares us all. We discover that with him, God, providing for and protecting us, there is really no need to be afraid at all. There's no reason. The Bible tells us there is no reason. Fear not, for I am with thee. Right? So we're constantly being given reasons to not fear, evidence that we will be okay. The bottom line is this: fear does not come from God. There is no fear in love, for perfect love casteth out fear, for fear hath torment. Right? Fear is from Satan, and it's designed to destroy us and to keep us from really connecting with the love that would give us the peace that passes understanding. So, when it comes to times like this where fear is being turned into a game and it's funny and it's cute, we have to understand it ain't cute and it ain't funny, and it's definitely not a game. we are constantly hearing about World War III going on, and there are people who are running around deathly afraid right now. And we cannot fall into the trap of fear, because fear makes rational people do irrational things. So if you want to keep your wits about you, you got to be careful about trifling with things like Halloween and times like this. And certainly you got to be careful about watching these scary movies, which just continue to drive that addiction that we have to fear. Anyway, I hope the stream was okay, and I hope that you guys got everything that I shared today, and I hope that you look at yourself and whether or not you are addicted to fear, and maybe become addicted to love and peace instead. Take care, folks.